And so one of my suggestions in food rules is avoid products with high fructose corn syrup. Not because it's so dangerous, but because it's a marker of processed food. I mean, who do you know who cooks with high fructose corn syrup?
Yeah.
Nobody has it at home, except in food products. If you want to avoid processed foods, that's a good way to do it.
I'd like to get to nutritionism.
Yes.
That's another phenomenon that you can you eat yourself healthy by sort of
obsessing about biochemistry. Yeah.
Yes, yes, and you're very critical about that.
Well, you know, we've tried this experiment.
Yeah.
For the last 30 years or so, you know, we all have educated ourselves supposedly about antioxidants and vitamins and folic acid and now probiotics and prebiotics. We have a head full of biochemistry that actually we don't understand very well, but we know that this is supposed to be good, this is supposed to be evil. And so I'm going to eat products with antioxidants without trans fats, and then I'll be healthy.
And it changes because
that's the problem.
They told us that animal fat would kill you.
Was evil.
And that butter would just murder us.
And they replaced it with margarine, which turned out to be much less healthy than butter.
And butter is back.
So the problem is, there's two problems. Nutrition science is very hard to do. We don't really understand nutrition that well yet. The way I see it, nutrition science is a very young science. It's kind of where surgery was in the year 1650. Okay? Very promising, very interesting, but not yet ready to take on our bodies without great risk. Nutritionism, this way of looking at food through this pseudo-scientific lens, by reducing it to the nutrients. Nutritionism is an ideology, basically. Like any other ideology, it just has these assumptions about how to look at things that you're not even aware of. First assumption is that nutrients are what's important about food. You don't have to understand salmon, you have to understand omega-3s, and you have to understand, you know, other fats, and you have to understand protein. No, you have to understand salmon. And so we see through foods, and we see the nutrients, or we think we do. That's one premise. The other premise is that you can divide any food into good and evil nutrients. And if you eat enough good ones, omega-3s, and avoid enough bad ones, trans fats or sugar, you'll be healthy. But you see, the problem with this whole way of eating is that it depends on getting it right. That we know what a bad nutrient is, and we know what a good nutrient is. And if you look at the history of the last 100 years, we keep changing our mind. Because the science is so uncertain. Saturated fat, which we were all taught will give you heart attacks, there is not strong evidence of that. If you are a smoker and you eat a lot of saturated fat, it may be a problem. But if you're not, it may not be that bad at all.
But so everybody moved from saturated fat into carbs.
Exactly.
Carbohydrates.
And you see, and that's the problem with this way of, you know, this Manichaean good-bad nutrient thing. Because as soon as you demonize one nutrient, you give a free pass to another. So we said fat is evil. Well, that must mean you can eat all the carbohydrates you want. And this low-fat craze that we've been on for the last 20 or 30 years, in fact, has been a period of rising weight because we're binging on carbohydrates. Because soda, Coca-Cola doesn't have any fat, so that must be okay. And if you look at the dietary statistics, you find that since we started demonizing fat, people's consumption of carbohydrates has gone through the roof. In America, we're eating 400 more calories per person per day since the low-fat campaign. And we've gotten very heavy on this low-fat campaign. So I don't think this way of approaching food works. I think we need to return the focus to whole foods, to real food. And then it gets very simple.
Your message is very simple. It is. Well, your first maxim is that you should, isn't it the first
Eat food.
Eat food, yes, that you should eat food, and then you should eat food, but mostly plants.
Mostly plants because, for a couple of reasons. We're eating too much meat. We're eating too much meat for our own health and for the health of the environment. And I don't know what the figures are in Iceland, but in the United States we eat about 208 pounds of meat per person per day. It's like 500 kilos of meat. I'm sorry, per year.
You have, of course, these ridiculous steaks.
We do. We have these giant steaks, and we have meat for breakfast, and we have meat for lunch, and it's just too much meat.
It's obscene.
Now, the problem may not be the meat. Meat is nutritious food. Meat is good food. People have been eating meat for many thousands of years. But it's pushing the vegetables off the plate. And vegetables, we know, have a lot of very positive things about them. We don't know exactly what they are, but we do know that populations that eat a lot of vegetables, say that eat a pound of vegetables a day, have half the rate of cancer of most people. So vegetables are good for you. And either, you know, too much meat is bad, or it just pushes the vegetables out. So I think that I love meat. I'm a carnivore. But I think we have to return it to its old status as something you have a couple times a week or you use to flavor your food.
Yeah.
You mix it in a stir fry. You take just a little bit of meat can go a long way if you eat it with vegetables.
That's the Mediterranean diet,
Exactly.
really, where people really couldn't afford meat, and you can't grow
Exactly.
stocks in the way that you can on the plains of America.
Yeah. Meat, it's funny, meat and sugar are similar in a way. In nature, they're rare
Yeah.
and special. You can't get sugar in nature. You get fruit, which is seasonal and comes packaged with all these good things, and water, but when you can take something that is very special, that our bodies love, we're genetically hardwired to like meat, to like fat, and to like sugar and salt, and then you make them common and cheap. Of course we're going to binge on it.
Yes. Another thing which is interesting, and I think it is interesting in this age of eating in front of either the television set or the computer,
or the car.
Or in the car, is that you recommend that people eat meals.
I know, there's a radical idea.
It is actually. It's very simple, but it's radical.
Well, I mean, that's,
Tell your kid to come to the table.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think the family meal is one of the most important institutions of a civilization. I really do. It's where we socialize our children. We teach them manners. They learn about politics. I learned all about politics listening to my father rant about the Vietnam War. I mean, this is where there's so much information that is conveyed at the table. Plus, people learn to eat the same thing.
Yes.
We're moving to a society where every member of the family is getting a different microwavable entree.
Yeah.
And when you share food, magic things happen. This is why at summit meetings they have a banquet. This is why, you sit down with your friends or even your enemies, and amazing things happen when you eat from the same platter. And we're losing this as we go to this individualistic eating.
Yeah.
And so I think it's very important to civilization, actually, to eat together. And Americans are now eating 20% of their meals in the car.
Yeah.
It's very isolating.
Yes.
It can't be good for your digestion. And think about what kind of food you can eat in the car.
Yes.
I mean, you can't eat anything that involves a knife and fork. You eat snack.
Is your message? Well, of course, they're bestsellers. Your books, they've been sold by almost millions.
It's
so
amazing.
your message is getting through.
It's getting through, but as you know, a bestseller is still reaches a small percentage. I mean, the United States has 310 million people, and if you sell 100,000 books, you have a bestseller. So you're not reaching everybody. But the message is getting out there. There is a food movement rising in America. It's one of the most exciting social movements right now to reform our food system, our agriculture. So, yes, there's rising consciousness. And the reason is, it's not because of me or these books. It's because people know there's something wrong. They look around them and they see, they know someone who has type 2 diabetes. Children are getting this. It used to be called adult onset diabetes. Children are getting it. Rising levels of obesity. Lots of chronic disease that didn't used to exist in the numbers it does. And all the environmental problems tied to the food system. Pollution from feedlots are affecting people in the Middle West. The water is contaminated in many places. So people know that there's something wrong with the way we're eating.
And the horrible industrialization of like chicken farming and
the feedlots.
Something that
it's shocking.
Baffles the mind. Yeah.
It's shocking, and very few of us have seen these places because they're hidden away, and they don't allow journalists to come. Usually, they're very secretive about what they're doing, and the images on the packages still are very pastoral. I mean, it looks like Grandpa's farm. Yeah. But in fact, when you go to these places, and that's what started me writing about this, was visiting some of these feedlots, chicken farms, pig farms, and just being, these are visions of hell, these places. And to realize that you're supporting these places when you buy that fast food hamburger is enough to change the way you eat. I think we should all see these places. Yes. I think children should go on field trips to feedlots and slaughterhouses, and then things would change overnight.
Yeah. Of course, this is touched upon in the film, Food Incorporated, where you're one of the stars of that film.
Yeah. And it came out of my research for Omnivore's Dilemma, the book you mentioned earlier, that's what opened my eyes. I went to industrial farms. I went to an industrial potato farm, actually, that had a tremendous effect on me. I love French fries, I love potatoes, and supposedly the best potatoes in the United States come from Idaho, this desert state in the West. And I went out there, and I went to a potato farm, and it was 36,000 acres, so 18,000 hectares, and it was organized. It's a desert, so there are these giant crop circles. Each of them is 50 or 75 acres with a big sweeping second hand that reaches the entire field and is constantly putting out water, pesticide, and fertilizer. Okay. It's all controlled, remote controlled. The farmer doesn't go into the field because the poisons are so toxic.
I see.
And the farmers also can't eat their potatoes until 6 weeks after they take them out of the ground. It's like a new carpet. You have to let the chemicals go off into the air before you can eat them. And I was shocked. I was like, that's where the potatoes come from? I had no idea. And there are these gorgeous potatoes, and they're full of pesticide. And the farmers, if that irrigation, it's called an irrigation pivot, if it breaks within 5 days of when he's sprayed the most toxic chemicals, they let the whole crop go because they can't walk out into the field. It's such a powerful neurotoxin, brain toxin. So I didn't want to eat those kind of potatoes anymore.
No, I understand.
And so I began exploring the food chain and alternatives. And luckily, we have wonderful alternatives now. We have organic, we have biodynamic, we have local. So things are getting better in some ways.
I have to ask you about Iceland. I know you just came here recently. You got the
yesterday
the prize from the Yoko Ono, and of course we have a lot of fish. We're quite close to nature. It's difficult to grow many things, but we can grow vegetables in greenhouses, and
you have the source of
climate
energy.
isn't so bad. So we have an option to. But of course we have to import a lot of food, and you will see that our supermarkets are basically the same as everywhere else. So, your impression?
Well, it would be arrogant of me to say very much until I've learned more. And tomorrow, actually, I'm planning to visit some farms and learn more about your agriculture. You have some incredible advantages. You can grow indoors under glass without burning oil because of geothermal. And that's a tremendous advantage. And there are very few places in the world that can do that. So you can grow warm weather, tropical. You could grow tropical fish in rotation with vegetables in those greenhouses, and maybe people are doing it. I don't know. And you have a wonderful supply of fish, which is one of the healthiest foods, and becoming one of the most precious foods in the world.
It's becoming more and more expensive.
Cod, which used to be an inexpensive fish in the United States, is now a luxury fish.
But of course, we have to worry about levels of mercury in fish, and
well, we do, and the sustainability of the stocks. I mean, we have to realize that fish is really the last wild food, the last significant wild food that people eat. And we want to keep it going because it's a very important one. We have learned that the nutrients you get from fish are absolutely vital for brain development, for eyesight, all these kind of things. And most civilizations sprang up near bodies of water for that reason. The big human brain probably needs omega-3 fatty acids. So it's a precious asset and needs to be handled conservatively. The scientists I talk to say they're more concerned actually about shortages of omega-3s in the human diet than they are about mercury.
Yeah.
So for what it's worth. And they advise even pregnant women that they're better off eating the fish than not eating the fish because it's such an important nutrient. But I understand that there's a revival of local agriculture going on here, and that there is a slow food movement or chapter that's very active, and that there are certain chefs that are beginning to appreciate the traditional Nordic cuisines, and that's happening throughout Scandinavia as well. And so there's some very exciting developments, and reconnecting with our food traditions, reconnecting with what nature has to offer us and the place we happen to live. Is very valuable. Icelanders are probably adapted to the traditional diet in various ways. And one of the things, it's wonderful to get these novel tastes from all over the world. But your native diet is a precious thing. And
it is the best thing to eat something that comes from close where you live.
Yeah.
It is.
Well, think about it. How many generations have been eating that way?
No, and when it's in season, also.
Well,
not when it's not a strawberry grown in the south of Spain in February.
And you know what? It's not going to be very good. The thing we forget when we fly this food around the world, it seldom has any taste.
You are absolutely right.
And there's something quite beautiful about waiting until the local strawberries come in, because they're so much better, and it's a special occasion. And you lose that kind of savor, that edge, when you eat the same thing all year round. So I think eating seasonally is kind of fun, and I don't see a big sacrifice. And when I get home, I'm going to stop eating tomatoes for 6 months. They're almost done, and that's fine.
Okay, but you live in California.
I admit we have it easier in many, many ways.
Thank
But
you.
Your fish is much more beautiful.
Thank you for being on Silver Reyes, Michael Pollan.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much.